This lesson is pretty much the opposite, if you want to consider it, of the lesson right prior to this. And the one prior to this, our goal was to shrink our angles by half. And in this lesson, our goal is to actually increase or double our angles by 2. So if you look here this first time, we go from a T up to a 2T, from a T up to a 2T. Or the same way, if I wanted to go, let's say our angle was, let's say sine of 3T, then the formula, if I look over here on the top right, would be plus or minus double of that. So it'd be 1 minus cosine of 6T over 2. Okay, so always a 2 in the denominators, always and a 1 there. The only thing that changes in these formulas are just your angle sizes, and that's everything. So if we look at example 1 to get started with, okay, we want to find the sine of x over 2. Well, the sine of x over 2 is going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of double x over 2. So x over 2 times 2 is just x all over 2. Okay? And if we go to our formula, or what's given to us at the very beginning, what's given to us is sine x. And I need to find cosine x. So how do we find cosine x when I'm given sine x? Well, cosine squared x is 1 minus sine squared x. So it's 1 minus the negative 4/5 squared. So 1 minus 16/25, which is 9/25. And if we take a square root with a plus or minus, we'll go with 3/5. Okay, now here's a thing that we have to find out here. Is on here on the right in the green that I've written up is the fact that my angle right here is x. Coming here in the middle, look what it says. X is between 180 and 270. Okay, so between 180 and 270, when my angle is x, what's my x value there? Well, 180 to 270 is in quadrant 3, so my x value would definitely be negative. So cosine x is a negative 3/5. It's very important. We're about to come back and visit this here in just a second. So it's kind of important that we pay attention to that, because we're actually going to have to change it up here in just a little bit. Okay? Alright, so coming to our problem. Sine of x over 2 is plus or minus the square root of 1 minus a negative 3/5 over 2. So plus or minus 1 plus 3/5 over 2, and plus or minus, let's see, if I combine the two, 1 plus 3/5, you get 8/5 divided by 2. And keeping on just for a second, let's see, 8/5 divided by 2 is multiplying by the reciprocal, so 2 into 8 is 4, so it's plus or minus the square root of 4, which is 2, over the square root of 5, and let's clean this up. So plus or minus 2 square roots of 5 over 5. Now, that right there is what sine of x over 2 equals. But my thing is it the plus or is it the minus? How do we find that out? Let's go up to the original part of the problem. It says here that x is between 180 and 270. But our angle here that they're asking us to find is x over 2. So if x is between 180 and 270, then what we know actually is that x over 2 is between 90 and 135. Just divide everything up here, just divide it by 2, so that way we can figure out what it is. Okay, so what are my y values when I'm between 90 degrees and 135? My y values there are up in quadrant 2, so we're going to go with positive. So my overall answer after all of this is going to be 2 square roots of 5 over 5. And y'all expect to do that every single time where you're going to have to change your domain. You're going to have to use your domain as is for maybe your side work, and then have to change it to actually get your answer. So expect that every time. Okay. So let's try that again with example 2. In example 2, we want to find cosine of 2t. So cosine of 2t is plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of double that, which is 4t over 2. Okay, well, what's given to me that maybe I can possibly use? Well, I need cosine of 4t. I'm given secant of 4t. Well, if I know secant, don't I know cosine? They're reciprocals. So it's going to be 1 plus, and then the reciprocal of 25/7 is a negative 7/25, all over 2. So that's kind of nice. We finally didn't have to do side work. It's about time, right? So 1 minus 7/25 all over 2. It's going to equal plus or minus, combine these together, so 25 minus 7 is 18/25 divided by 2. So 18 over 25 divided by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. 2 into 18 is 9. So the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, so we just found cosine of 2t equals this. But do we go plus? Do we go with minus? Well, I know that it tells me that 4t is between pi and 3 pi over 2. So where is 2t? Well, 2t then is between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 4. So in this interval right here, where are my x values? Are my x values positive or are they negative? Well, pi over 2 to 3 pi over 4, that's basically 90 degrees to, let's see, 115? No, 125, if I do the math right. And in there, the x values are negative, so it's going to be negative 3/5. And then we can have that one finished. Okay. On this one, we want to find cosine of t over 4. Well, cosine of t over 4 only has one formula. It's 1 plus cosine double of t over 4 is t over 2 divided by 2. Okay, and again, if you wanted to know what's t over 4 times 2, just 2 and there's 2, so then you get your t over 2. That's all I was doing when I was thinking about that, okay? Alright, so from there, what's given to me is tangent. So how do I get cosine off of tangent? All I can think of is to use one of our very first identities, where we have, let's see, whoops, come back up here. Okay, the only thing I can think of that we can use, again, is one of our first identities, where we have, what was it, tangent squared. In this case, we'll call it t over 2, plus 1 is equal to secant squared t over 2. Okay, well, tangent squared t over 2, well, tangent of t over 2 is 12/5, so tangent squared t over 2 will be square of that. 144 over 25 plus 1 is going to be 169 over 25 is secant squared t over 2. Take a square root with a plus or minus, so 13/5 is going to be secant of t over 2. Okay, so secant, remember, is just cosine by the reciprocal, so all of this is saying is that cosine of t over 2 is actually the reciprocal, which is 5/13, and t over 2, taking this as is, because it has t over 2 in the middle, between pi and 3 pi over 2, our cosine should be negative. So that's not we haven't figured out this plus or minus in the front yet. All we figured out so far is just cosine of t over 2. It's going to be 1 minus 5/13 over 2. So plus or minus, see, 13 minus 5, so 8/13 divided by 2. And keep going here. 8/13 times 1/2, which is multiplying by the reciprocal of the bottom. So plus or minus, the 2 goes into 8 4 times. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 13 is 13. So we want to rationalize that denominator. And last but not least, all we have to do is their sign thing. Okay? It tells us that t over 2 is between pi and 3 pi over 2. So then dividing everything through by 2 will give us t over 4 between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. And those x values there are definitely negative. So our final answer is cosine of t over 4 is equal to negative 2 square roots of 13 over 13. And there's my final answer. Alright, so let's practice using some of our half angle identities some more. It wants us to find sine of 105. I don't know sine of 105. So let me ask you two questions. Do you know half of 105 or do you know double of 105? Well, half of 105 would be what? 52.5, so we definitely don't know that. And double of 105 is actually, what, 210? And we definitely know 210. Okay, so sine of 105 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of double that, which is 210 degrees, all over 2. So it's going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, what's our x value at 210 degrees? Let's think about that. 210 is just 30 degrees past 180, and the x value there is going to be a square root of 3 over 2. And since it's in quadrant 3, it's going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. All over 2. Okay, so let's keep cleaning this up a little bit more. So plus or minus the square root of 1 plus the square root of 3 over 2 divided by 2. So 2 plus the square root of 3 over 2 divided by 2. It's a lot of work in there. So plus or minus, let's see, it's saying 2 plus the square root of 3 over 2, and then basically instead of divided by 2, dividing by 2 is multiplying by the reciprocal, which is multiplying by half. And why don't we in this case write it as plus or minus the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3, and 2 times 2 is 4. And how we're actually going to clean it up, we're just going to leave it like this, as plus or minus 2 plus the square root of 3, and then all over 2. So I can take the square root of 4 and we can write it as 2. Okay. Last, all we have to do is figure out the sign of 105. Is it going to be positive? Is it going to be negative? So think of where 105 is actually on the unit circle. So it's to the left of 90. We're in quadrant 2, and your y value there, is it positive or negative? Well, in quadrant 2 we're positive, so my actual full answer that we can box up and call it done is this one right here. Okay, so take 2 seconds real quick. If you want to pause this, just look at this, look at the math. It's not really it's the math that you kind of need to get more comfortable with, or how I worked with the radicals. And this is what you're going to expect to see whenever you look at your answers in the back of the book. Okay.